Welcome back for the second video. And I think this is the video that all of our FPS fans are waiting for. The video where we get a weapon and we can start clicking the mouse to make lasers appear. That is why people play FPSs. So we don't need enemies, we just want to make lasers and particles appear on the screen. So we left off after editing our projectile. One thing I do want to point out is I was editing the prefab the whole time, so just double check to make sure there's no overrides that you need to commit. So if you were editing the projectile in the world, make sure that you hit update so that it updates the prefab. But now I'm going to take that out of the world. So we need to begin setting up kind of the code structure for us to be able to switch between weapons. So that is going to be, let's see, well, I guess my player's not in the world. So I'm going to go to the player folder, and I'm going to begin creating a new script for the player. So much like how there's an FPS controller, I'm going to have a dedicated script to handling weapons and attacking. I don't want to put it in FPS controller because it doesn't have anything to do with movement, and it is going to get complicated enough on its own. So I want to keep it separate. So we're going to create a new C# script called weapon_controller. And of course, whenever I push enter, it kind of sort of pops up Visual Studio. All right, so here is my weapon controller. So let's begin setting a few things up. First up is a vector of my weapon. So we'll call this header player weapons. So that's going to be public game object bracket. So it's an array of game objects, weapons. And actually, let's call this weapon prefabs. So the tooltip for this so that's going to be scripted prefabs that actually have all the code and such. So this will have a weapon script. Now this one, I'm going to cheat a little bit because I've already done this. I've messed with the numbers ahead of time. So I'm going to save us a little bit of headache here. And this is going to be not image effects. Public vector3 array weapon positions equals open curly brace. I'm going to indent this a little bit. That looks like a method. It's not supposed to be a method. It's going to have inside of here this is a shorthand declaration of an array. A new vector3 with the point 0.41f, negative 0.342f, and then 0.31f, comma, a new vector3. This one is same x value, same y value, but a different z value of 0.67. And then one more. And actually, I'm just going to reuse this one. So this is a shorthand declaration of positions to spawn the weapons at. This was just me fiddling with this for many minutes. I wouldn't say an hour, but trying to make the weapons look good. And of course, you may want to tweak these values. Each weapon kind of had a different appearance point that looked better. So actually, that's why I did this. Because there wasn't just one size fits all for how they looked. Like the pistol ones and the longer weapons. So different values. So this tooltip, the ideal position for the player hand to move to. And then now I reference this thing called player hand. So we're going to need this variable called public game object player hand. This is the player prefabs game object that will parent the weapons. So essentially, this is like the player hand is going to be a child of camera, and so that when the camera moves around, player hand's going to follow it. And just a few private variables. So a game object non-array for current weapon, and a index. So we're going to, inside of start, so when the player basically loads up, we're going to tell it to equip weapon. Oh, we don't have that method, so let's write that method first. So initial index is 0. All right, so we don't need, oh, we do need update. So we'll just write it underneath update. Public void equip weapon. And we'll pass an index. So if current weapon is not equal to null, meaning we have a weapon, now this is probably what we'll do down the road is implement like a unequipped animation where the weapon just like lowers. But right now, just for the sake of simplicity, we're kind of going old school Doom or Quake style, where when you hit 1 or 2, the weapon just appears right on the screen ready for you to go. So we're going to destroy the current weapon. And then we are going to spawn the new weapon. So current weapon will equal instantiate. This isn't that hard. Long of line. Weapons prefab at index, and it will get parented to player hand dot transform. So it uses that object, and so it's going to instantiate this. Well, I don't like that comment. It looks kind of silly. So it parents it directly underneath player hand, and it spawns in 0, 0, 0. I think it uses identity and all that stuff for this. So the player hand will need to adjust its positioning, which is what we have up here. Now, if you may eventually discover that rotation matters too, so you might include a set of rotations that you have to adjust, and you would just swap the rotation out. So player hand dot transform dot local position. Because it is a child of the camera, these values are relative to the camera object. So it's because the X is positive, it's going to appear on the right as if the player is right-handed. If you want left-handed weapons, just make it negative. And these are all relative to the camera, so that's why I'm using local position here. Now that we have equip weapon, we can call it. So we can call equip weapon using that kind of initial index we had here, custom current weapon index. And then inside of update, I want to make a method called, well, this is going to be private, I guess. Check for a swap. And so we're going to call that first. It's just an input method. If input.getKey down keycode dot alpha 1. So that is the upper keyboard one, so the one that's above Q, not the numpad. So this just kind of using those keys and just kind of hard coding it to swap these around. So that'll swap to index 0, and we'll run the equip weapon method. And we're just going to repeat this for all 3 of my weapons. So if you had fewer or more, you would just do the same thing. Now, you kind of might be wondering, well, why don't you just call equip weapon regardless? Well, I don't want to always be deleting my weapon and spawning new ones. I only want to delete my weapon whenever I send the command to spawn a new weapon. We are going to have to add something to prevent us from cheating. Like, if your weapon has a cooldown, prevent you from like kind of getting around the cooldown by spawning a new weapon. So we'll probably come back to this and add a little bit of logic to it to make it better. And then, oops. We'll add some code for attacking, but let's make sure this works. This is a lot of code that we've just added, and let's hit save. And let's attach this to the player and see if we can swap weapons. We need to rig up my weapon prefabs, and we have to create a player hand first. So let's go and do that. So I'm going to edit the player prefab. And when editing this prefab, I'm going to need to click on main camera and create an empty child. And this will be called weapon hand. Its position honestly doesn't matter too much because it's going to get replaced during that spawn weapon code. I'm just typing in the values that were my default values. Now, click on the parent of the player. Let's attach that new script. So we want to attach my new weapon controller to the root of parent, and we will see it showing up here. I want to tell it that I have 3 weapons, so I'm going to click here and push 3 and hit enter. And you'll see that I have a bunch of nones. So I just want to go to the prefabs for each weapon. So that's from the packages, FPS, weapons. And I'm going to attach blaster to be in position 0. I'm going to attach the shotgun to be in position 1. And the launcher to be in position 2. And then from the prefab, make sure this is not a copy of the player in the world, but from the prefab, I'm going to take weapon hand and put it down here. Then hit play. And you can see that it loads this up. Let's go to full screen, because I think that might be a better take on this. And so if we push the different keys, you can see Unity turns teal when it's pre-caching the textures or preloading the textures. There's some fancy ways that I don't know to like preload the textures so that it already has them in memory before you swap to the weapon. All right, so we got weapons. Let's begin setting up the blaster so that we can actually spawn that that projectile with it. So we need some scripts. And that's kind of a tough call where I want to put it. Maybe it might be a underneath player. I might create another folder called weapons. See, I honestly don't know what causes that error. So I'm going to create another, whatchamacallit, interface. So this is going to be called iWeapon. This one's a little bit more important than the projectile one. So it's going to be an interface. And there's actually a lot going on in the iWeapon interface. So we're going to have a fire method. We're going to have a fire down. And we're going to have a fire up. So these correspond to the key press behaviors. And we could, while we're here, just so we don't have to do this later, do the same thing for a fire 2. That's up to you if you want to put fire 1. Well, maybe we should. So that we have like left mouse, right mouse. Because we do, in a later video, I'm going to take fire 2 and make that an aim down sights for some of the weapons. And we'll have different behaviors for each weapon. But even the blaster, if I want to turn that into a chargeable weapon, where if I hold down the button, it charges up a more powerful bolt, then maybe I will want to use this down and up stuff. So I do want to actually try to make each weapon slightly different so that we can see different uses of this. Other useful things. We'll need an isReady method. This will prevent me from swapping my weapon if the cooldown is active. And then for now, we'll just have a get crosshair. Oop. For that to work, I have to import Unity engine.ui to use capital I image. Because each weapon I want to have a different crosshair, so when we get to making the UI, we'll use this get crosshair stuff. So I can hit save on that. And now I can begin the lengthy process, I guess, of making my blaster. So I'm going to start with just getting the blaster to work, and then I think in a in kind of a part 2 to this video, we'll go back through and turn it into a chargeable weapon, because I do want to make all the weapons different, but I just want to get a basic blaster working and show you how we would do a basic blaster. So we need a new script here. So right click, create a new C# script, weapon _ blaster. So this is going to have a lot of pieces to it. So we'll start with the weapon stats. And this is all the traits of the weapon that like give it its gameplay behavior. So first up, time between attacks. Effectively your cooldown. So We need a damage. And we need a speed. And so if you want to make the tooltips more interesting, you could. But I'm going to leave these as they are right now. Okay, next up, now we need like a bunch of just things. So I'll call this internal bindings. And one more header for related prefabs. So this will be, for example, like the projectile. And I need to include Unity engine.ui to include the crosshair. I'm not going to do the tooltips for these. I might do them in between videos. The tooltips are not super useful because we're the ones writing the game. So public image crosshair, and then probably the sound effect. So public audio clip. I'm always struggling with what I'm going to call this. Sound shoots. So basically what sound plays when you attack. Then internal bindings are things related to the prefab, things that we need to have attached up for this to work correctly. And I'm going to go through and actually have us look at all the things that we would normally do for a weapon. So I want to do a muzzle flash. I do want to put some particle effects on it, so that just if you wanted to do particles, you could do particles. But I think a light plus muzzle flash tends to look the best. So spawn point is where the projectile will spawn from. Sprite renderer for the muzzle flash. A light for the muzzle flash. And then a particle system. And I'll call it muzzle particles. And then so just a few of the internal things. So we would need a cooldown. And we would need a audio source for it to play sound effects. So quite a lot of variables, but realistically the implementation of this isn't going to be too terribly crazy. We do need to tell it that it is going to be a child of iWeapon. So up here I'm going to have to add iWeapon to that. And upon adding that, that is going to have us, like all of these methods that I need to implement, we are going to just go to implement interface. So those two look about the same. So it has all of our things that we're going to have to eventually program. Now, I don't know if I want to throw errors on all of this, so maybe I'm just going to take that throw out. And just minimize these as needed. We'll come back to Fire 2 for aim down sights in a little bit. All right, so get crosshair though. We can just simply return crosshair. That's all that needs to do. And then is ready is going to just return cooldown less than or equal to 0. So is the cooldown ready? Because we don't want to allow the player to weapon swap until the weapon that is cooled down. That's just to prevent them from, if there's like a sniper type of weapon that has a second cooldown, from swapping out before it's done being charged up. So even though it's not realistic, it's a gameplay balance thing. All right, so a few other things. We need a awake method. And the awake method is just going to attach our stuff. So we're going to attach the audio source. And then, no, I normally would disable the muzzle flash stuff, but it should be disabled, so we don't need to worry about that. So underneath that, I'm going to set up the stuff for the muzzle flash. The duration is how long it will stick around for. Now I'm going to use a well, let's write the other method. I was going to use a coroutine to turn it off. So this will be a enumerator. And it will have, so being an enumerator, it's going to have the wait stuff here. So that will be yields, and you can see the autocomplete is pretty much finishing it. This will cause it to wait for that long until the time has passed, and then we're just going to turn all this stuff off. And then I'm going to tell it to trigger the coroutine. So start coroutine, turn off muzzle flash, and then I'm going to specify the duration, which comes in as a parameter. So whenever we spawn the muzzle flash, whenever we tell it to make the muzzle flash appear, we'll specify how long we want it to hang around for. Update method. We want simple, just if cooldown is greater than 0, cooldown minus equals time.delta time. So that our cooldown will tick down. And now we just write the code to make this thing work its magic. Well, let me throw an audio player in here. So the reason I do this is just because every time I play audio, I do have a bunch of null checks, because we may not set it up right away, and maybe you don't want audio. That way, it's not going to break your program if you don't end up attaching audio to this. So if the audio source was null, we'll try to grab it. And then if the audio source is not equal to null, and the clip that we're trying to play is also not equal to null, then we will do audio source dot play one shot, which plays that sound effect. So if we don't end up binding it, so we'll test it first without this, and it won't crash. It's just a lot of crash protection, really. All right, so let's now write the fire method. To be fair, we could do this null stuff here, and like, I know if you may not be the biggest fan of particles, we could do if muzzle particles is not equal to null, then do that. That way we can at least just do the focus on the muzzle flash first, because that's a more subtle effect. The particle effect is a little bit extreme, so if we don't want to end up doing it, we could just do that. Okay, so the fire is where all the magic is going to happen. So if, we'll just call is ready here, is ready, game object laser equals instantiate. So standard instantiation, we're going to spawn the projectile prefab at the spawn point. So we'll have to set that. It's going to be like the barrel, the tip of the gun. So it's going to spawn it at the tip of the weapon. And we have that initialize method that first wants the name, the owner is player. Then the speed is a variable that we have here called projectile speed, and the damage is a variable called damage. So you can play around with this. You don't want it to be around for very long. You just want it to be really quick. We're going to use that play audio method that we wrote, and then the sound effect is called sound shoot, and then we will update the cooldown. And so this will function as a very basic laser. We can hit save, and all this should be done. And again, I post the code in the description of the video, so if you're having any trouble with this, you could check that. So now let's go rig up the weapon now that we have this script mostly ready to go. We do need to set up this fire command inside of weapon controller. And so let's do that real fast, just so that it knows to do its thing. So in update, this to do add code for attacking. If, and we'll just knock it out right now. This is a little excessive. If get button fire 1 current weapon dot get components iWeapon dot fire. Get button up, and then get button down. And I'm going to rearrange them to be in the correct order, because technically get button down happens first. Then if the button is being held down, which would be true for the frame that you hit button down, and then when we release the button, it will do its thing. So that's kind of the official order. And we'll copy this and do this for fire 2. So that we're reading all of my attacking inputs. And the beauty of this is it doesn't matter what script we're sending the message to. As long as it's a weapon type, it will have some implementation for these methods, even if those implementations do nothing, which 5 of mine don't do anything. The only one that does anything is fire 1. So that's kind of cool. We could also make this more restricted. We could also then say and current weapon dot get component is ready. So then it will only let you swap the weapon if the cooldown is clean. So I'm pretty happy with that script now. So I'll hit save on this. We will now start rigging up the weapon. So that's going to take us to our weapon. Hopefully YouTube makes this a new section. That this is the attaching section. This is where we set up the actual prefab. So we're going to take our weapon script for weapon blaster and put it onto the root here. Now there's a bunch of things for us to attach, so we can start knocking some of them out. We already have the projectile. We don't have the crosshair, but we're not doing anything with that yet, so we'll come to that later. The sound effect, there was some audio included in here. So you could test them. If that weapon sounds good, then we will roll with that. All right, spawn point is probably going to be gun muzzle. Now I need to set up the muzzle flash and the muzzle light and the particles. So under gun muzzle, I'll make a child object. So we'll make an empty child. And we'll call this muzzle flash. So the component that I want to add is a sprite renderer. Well, you can already see I've searched for sprite. So start searching for sprite and pull up sprite renderer. Now we've got to go and make a sprite out of whatever we want to be our flash. So that's going to be over here inside of this particles list. Now, this is where we can potentially run into a little bit of danger. If we are planning on using some of these for other purposes, we might be better off like making a copy of this. So I'm going to just take this, hit Control C, and then over here in materials, I might create a subfolder called sprites. So things that are definitely dedicated sprites. And what that means is instead of a texture, I'm going to switch this over to a sprite. So I want sprite 2D and user interface. And then I'm going to, so none of this, don't need to change that. Well, maybe we can make this 512 because that's the size of the sprite, so that one unit is corresponding with that. None of that else needs to be changed. Well, maybe the alpha source from grayscale. And that's fine. So then hit apply. Now going over to muzzle flash, we're going to drag and drop this into here. And you can see, it's kind of hard to see, but that's where it's going to appear. So if we want it to be slightly bigger, we can maybe just make the X and the Y a little bit bigger. So I'm doing 1.5, and then set the color to something that kind of matches the gun. I should have like written down a hexadecimal color code, but that's fine. This is this like lime greenish color. We don't want a really too deep of a green. However, I will copy that hexadecimal color for the same light. And so I'm going to go to gun muzzle, create an empty child, and I'm going to call this muzzle light. It's different objects only because I want this to be a little bit higher up and a little bit forward some. Because I want it to like reflect on the top of the gun a tiny bit. So I'm kind of positioning the light so that it reflects on the gun more. Then the light is found under component rendering. And I'm going to paste that hexadecimal color code. The range, I want it to be reasonably small. This isn't like a huge light that I need. Now this gun may resist light because of the texturing. And I'm not an expert on texturing, so I wouldn't know how to change that. But I should be able to illuminate the world around me with this. So with my script, now that I have those finished, I can take the muzzle flash, attach it to the muzzle flash, and the muzzle light, and attach it there. We can come back and add the particles a little bit later, but if you remember, the script also has it so that it can be null. So I'm going to hit save, and then hit play. So if you wanted to move the muzzle flash around somewhere else, something that might make more sense, you could. But now, oh, you can see those little particles that the laser emits as it flies through the air. And now we have a laser. If you want to speed it up, you can. And I'll make a video that follows this one where we kind of tweak some of this behavior. So I'll try to, and actually, honestly, that video is more or less optional. If you're happy with how this is, then you can leave it. But in the next video, to differentiate the weapons, I'm going to make this a chargeable laser, so that if you hold down the button, it will charge up a laser bolt, and then when you release it, it shoots a power relative to that. And we still need to do ammo, we still need a UI, we still need a crosshair, so there's still a lot more to go on with this. And to be fair, I probably should make those laser bolts delete themselves after a little while, because they're traveling for a bit. All right, so let's do some particles, and then we'll wrap this up. All right, so pretty happy with how that's turning out. Maybe I want the particle speed, the projectile speed to be a little bit faster, so I'll bump that up to 30. Maybe make my time between attacks 0.3, because that was kind of rapid. Make the muzzle flash a tiny bit bigger, 1.6 maybe. Maybe pull it forward some. Again, a lot of this is just artistic and very subjective. All right, so let's put some particles on, I guess, the flash. No, I want to put them on the, yeah. So we'll put a effects particle system. And we'll do something very similar to what we did with the other one. So duration 2, lifetime 2, start speed 1. Jump down to renderer. We'll use that same material. Let's set the start size to like 0.2. Simulation space should be world. Gravity modifier, we'll go like 0.3. And the shape of emission, so this one's a little bit trickier, how we want the particles to emit out of this. So we could potentially have them shoot upwards. So potentially we could do like a cone, but we might want to rotate it. Oh, wrong way. -90. And radius of 0. Actually, I think I might go for a hemisphere. And I'm going to give them more velocity coming out. So, start speed 2. That's a bit too much. And instead of rate over time, I want them to be a burst. So I'm going to just make it like 10, maybe 15. The biggest problem is that you can't see, I can't really see the hemisphere. So, like that's shooting upward. So maybe I just want this to be 0. Okay, then that's like bursting out the front. And so we can do some like color over lifetime, just like we did the other ones. And so, oh, now I've got to rig it up. Also, I should probably turn off the sprite renderer so that muzzle flash isn't just like there before I click anything. I should also turn off the light. And I should also probably make the particles turn off play on awake. So uncheck that. So now it should only make particles. Oh, I didn't bind it. I just have to take the, I believe it was on muzzle flash. Yeah, the particle system was on muzzle flash. So then attach it to here. And now I should have particles whenever I shoot. So, I don't think the particles look as good as basically the muzzle flash, but I did want to at least demonstrate the general like idea behind that. I think the main issue is that they need to be probably more of a cone coming out the front rather than a hemisphere. But that's something I could play with off camera. So you can play with that. I think a cone maybe coming out of the front more than a hemisphere would probably be a better idea. I don't want to spend the entire time on the video with me messing with that. So we'll probably stop here. I don't think there's anything else I need to do. So it does appropriately disappear. So in the second video, we will try to, so there will be a part 2 to this. We will go through and make the hit effect whenever the laser impacts on something. And then also the second half of that video, we will retool the laser gun to be able to be a chargeable weapon. And then next up, so next video would be aim down sights. So we've got some work to do on this laser to make it kind of a cool weapon. But we now have the ability to make lasers appear in a game. And so I'm pretty happy with that. We've got lighting effects, So you can see that tree is lighting up when we shoot. And so, looks good. All right, well, thank you for watching. Tune in for part 2 for some more tweaks to this weapon. And I'll see you then.